Hello class, this is a walkthrough for the T2HT Experimental Site, modifying the template to work with your paper, and also walking through the ways that you'll do that, the ways you'll explain what you did in the reflection. So from here, when you click on this link inside the assignment, it takes you to this directory which shows you these 4 pages, right? And the first thing that you want to do is download or save each of these files. So if I open this in a new tab, there's the first page of the site, and you go under File and Save Page As, and then that's the whole title. You don't really want to do that whole title, you just want to save it and get rid of this part and save each of these files into a single folder on your computer, so that you'll have what looks a lot like this. You'll have a folder that's got T2HT2-1.html, T2HT2-2 HTML, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. And then you'll also want to save the CSS file in the same folder, and that should be called capital T2HT2.css, so that what you'll have is 4 pages looking just like this, right, in a folder on your computer. Then you'll open those files in Atom, and when you open that folder inside Atom, you can open each one of these in a new tab, and you'll have, right here's the first page, the second page, the third page, right, and the fourth page, and then there's the style sheet, right? So once you have those four pages, now the first part is largely a question of renaming the links, because you need to come up with your own set of names for the different pages, and then pasting your content into this template. Now you should note that I've got in here, let me make the font a little bigger so it's easier to see. I've put in a lot of comments that point out what to do. So when you've set up you'll want to leave these links the same, but you'll want to rethink the name of page 2, 3, and 4. You should leave the name of your home page, Home Experimental Website, the same. And then once you have figured out what you want to name those pages, once you make that change, then you can just copy this section, go to your second page, paste that nav section in here, go to your third page, paste that nav section in here, go to your fourth section, paste that nav section in there. Now for this paper, and I will go ahead and go right, and I've got it over here. So here's my one-page version of it, Towards a Recovery of 19th Century Farming Handbooks. Now the first page, this experiment in web writing, you will leave this first part pretty much the same, but the first part that you will revise, or really sort of add in this case, is the second paragraph on this page is about the course that this paper is from. Now this paper is from a History of Modern Rhetoric course at Purdue University in 2012. And when people think about the first paragraph here is what basically explains the assignment, but the paragraph that's underneath here is the paragraph which explains the course. And so this course is a History of Modern Rhetoric. It was written by Dr. Elizabeth Agnelli and put up as a sample. And then the history of rhetoric is a tricky thing for people to think about, because how we communicated back in time. So they both taught rhetoric differently and understood rhetoric differently. But knowledge practices and publishing and everything that they would do, the systems in which that worked, is a lot like the systems in which we work today. How do we do research? How do we publish research? What if that research is less formal than research in the universities? And so the example, one of the ways that I've tried to explain in this paragraph, the way someone might understand what this class is studying if it was a grandparent or somebody from another field, is the way that people nowadays, are doing all kinds of experimentation with all sorts of technology and systems, documenting what they do, posting it on YouTube pages, putting it in wikis to document things like Fix-It. There's all sorts of different ways that DIY, regular people sort of level doing research that's maybe not high-level scientific research, but they're doing research and they're publishing it. So these handbooks, as I said here, function in their time a bit like internet resource sites, wikis, or DIY or how-to sites. Today, farming was changing, from subsistence farming into an industry where farmers were specializing on crops to improve their production and sale and ship that stuff into the city. So explaining that in some language that regular people can understand is part of the goal of what this paragraph here is to do, is to say basically what was this course, and then what's one of the sort of challenges or one way that this course could relate to people today. That's what goes in that paragraph. Now, where you put that when you're using it in Atom, of course, is here you've got the main column, Here's the intro to the experimental site. You can leave that the same. And then here's the intro to your course, Changes to be about your course. And that's the first page. Now, as we said, the home and the link here, the interesting question is, okay, so now what will you change? The title for the paper, you'll notice, is up here, Toward a Recovery of 19th Century Farming Handbooks. So this will be the title of your paper, Now if we go to the second page, notice again, you'll need to make sure you change that top header to be the title of your paper. And then when you think about this first section, so this was, I took, and everybody should take the introduction to your paper, the first paragraph, and then in the sample paper I used, the first paragraph is sort of explaining her discovery of the problem. The second paragraph, this to achieve this goal, is a paragraph where she does an overview of what's going to happen in the paper. Now for the first version of this, I did not chunk this any more than it was sort of already chunked. But notice in this broken up website, you'll want to come up with a heading, that would go here, and potentially a heading, that would go with this, which is laying out the overview of the paper. So when you look at the code version here, this H1 heading will be the part that you want to add in. And so for this paper, she was looking at handbooks, and handbooks were not covered, and people hadn't studied them too much. So I just said introduction, a genre unaccounted for. And if we're going to revise this further, I might say something in here which actually sort of says, what the heck is a handbook and what are we talking about? So there's ways that as you do this transformation from a paper into a website, it draws you into thinking about how you would revise for a more general audience or for outside audiences than just for the class. And you can see, and I won't belabor reading too much here, but you can see where I've added in to each of these sections an original, so how it came, and then a possible revision, which is a little more chunked or focused. So the sections, historical demographics, technological change, and knowledge dissemination, I just took what she was giving as the sections of the paper and came up with subheadings for each of those. And I think I'll switch over to this view to show you. Whoops, I gotta go to page 2. All right, so here's the introduction, a genre unaccounted for, and here I've got original, right? And then a possible revision here. If I were going to revise this, I would, this is the sentences I would mess with in this first paragraph. I was going to do that more. Then this part is the overview, saying what the parts of this paper are. And we're just going to do 4, so I didn't go too much. You can see where you could break this up or chunk it up much smaller than I have done so far. And you don't need to get to the point that Reddish does. She has got so much chunk, almost everything is down to 1, 2, or 3 sentence paragraphs. But you do need to chunk yours more and focus it more and come up with headings to go with that and different ways of doing it. So for this section, you see the original, right, is written as 1 paragraph. To achieve this goal, she's got the sections, she's got that, and you can read this and sort of parse it out. But notice in the revision afterwards, things that she had set up in a list, I converted to be a visual list. And this is the kind of thing that Reddish is talking about making information that you can have scannable, make it scannable. So she provides an account of 3 important events: technological, population tech changes, and distribution of scientific knowledge, and farming's influence on education. And then the second section, which, so you can see how suddenly what you have to read through and put into a list here in the textual version now becomes a visual list representing that in this section. That's one kind, obviously 1 or 2 different kinds of revisions that you can be making for the site version. Okay, so that's the first page of the actual paper and the modifications made, chunking that up, and so that is the introduction and a paragraph that is sort of the overview of the sections of the paper. The next 2 sections are 2 chunks that you have selected out of your own paper. And when we say chunks, we mean a couple of paragraphs. Notice that in this example, this is 1 original paragraph of the paper and another original paragraph of the paper, and then each of those has been tweaked, right, to make it have more bullets or have their own headings, and we could chunk them down further if we needed to. But if we switch to this next page, so here's the population and technological changes, and here's the original part of this, and you've got 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, a fair amount of chunk, and I just threw this picture in there just to make it look a little nice, but that's the original. Now notice what has happened to it when we go to make it more web writing. So in each of these cases, I've chunked it into, right, so 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, and I just created headings. And I want to make sure, let's see, so when I did these headings, and we're on page 2 here, notice that for these I didn't do the H2 headings because I just wanted them to sit right on top of the paragraph. So all I did was actually, with these headings, I just made them bold by putting in the tag strong. Population grows from 7 to 10 million, and then closed the strong and did a break. So that put a bold line on top and then immediately grouped it together. So that's a sort of sneaky and quick way to add paragraph headings that will sit right on there. And so I'll switch back. So, and you can see how that plays out. There's the original version, and here, right, headings that are trying to focus in so that if someone were to just scan the page, right, they would get the gist of what's going on here. Now Reddish would want us to tighten these down even more, as this is what, 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences in that paragraph with a heading, right? And the next one's got even more. So it's not all the way to what would be a really web writing chunked down to topics, but it's more like it than certainly than the paper was before. So there's your page, your third page, and then the fourth page, distribution of new knowledge. And here again you see that it's presented as one chunk, one paragraph. And what I've done with that one paragraph is added headings. And I didn't add a paragraph heading for this one, but I added for each of the others. And then that starts to really get down to what's the point of what's going on here, and really gets down to this idea of farmers becoming effectively research writers. And of course they never understood themselves that way. They never understood themselves as rhetoricians. But if you disseminate knowledge and you explain it for other people and you do experiments to make things better, that's what you're functioning as. So that walks through, right, the quick changes, right, that you will make. And so for each of these you can paste in just whatever the content was that you had in this paper, which will have an H3, right, some heading and one or several paragraphs grouped inside that. And you will choose, right, a chunk for, right, so the experimental, the home page is pretty much this introduction and then your introduction to the course. Then there's 3 pages that have to do with your paper. The first page here is just the introduction to the paper, right, and the sort of overview of the paper. Then these 2 pages are each one chunk, right, 1 or 2 chunks, a couple paragraphs that come out of the paper. And as you go through and paste those in, the steps that I would do is make sure you get the chunks that you want pasted in there, and then once you get those chunks in, think about what you want to call, right, the sections of the paper. Or maybe you can think about that beforehand. What do you want to call each of these? And then when you set up your links, your nav bar, all you have to change, and you should do it on the first page first, but then here's where you change, right, the names for page 2, 3, and 4. And then once you do that, copy and paste it across them, and you should get the thing as a navigable set of pages. And then you'll want to think about, so once you get it saved and then it functions as a site on your own folder on your own computer, then you can see, are there ways that I can tweak and convert some paragraph text into some short, use some unordered lists, add headings, make the chunk smaller, revise it to make it more web-like. And as you'll go through, right, you'll come up with ideas. At least, yeah, I sure did, as we went through and looking at the different paragraphs and thinking, wow, I can split those up. If it goes on to a new idea, Reddish's rules are, yeah, if you shift to a new idea, it's time for a new paragraph. And then every time you do that, every time you shift to a new idea, you need to come up with a heading that's a meaningful heading that actually carries the idea or the point of what's going on in that section. All right, so the rest of this walkthrough is going to focus on how to take that website and write up your reflection. All right, so we'll go here. So the assignment here is putting Birkenstaff and Graph and Reddish in conversation, right? What are some of the ways academic conversation and web content both qualify as writing? So it's an interesting question how what it is that we do as writers and the ways that the texts that we construct are creating different, very different in these two cases, kinds of interactions for the reader. The specifications for this, about 4 to 5 pages, right? And I've got this sort of introduction that explains the problem, right? And use, headings and sections. So the first section and the basic problem. At first glance, the writing we've learned to do for academic classes, even advanced levels, like They Say, I Say, seems so different from the writing Reddish advises and demonstrates in letting go of the words that it's hard to understand them as doing the same thing. And so what we're going to do in this is just take a look at some of those examples and draw some comparisons across the two kinds of writing. So this introduction, right, you can literally just take this statement of the problem, because this is as much an essay exam as it is an essay, and put that down as a holding place, and then get started on section 2. And section 2 is really you just going back to your discussion post and pulling out your discussion post and doing what we did there, where you're picking a particular move, thinking about how that kind of move works, an example of it. So you've got a page to sort of recap of They Say, I Say particular move, and how it is negotiating an interaction between the writer, the sources, the readers, right? And the academic, the purpose, and there's more detail below in this, but that's the gist of section 2, is a recap of They Say, I Say. And the point of this section is, of course, for you to point out that, wow, I've done a lot of good writing work, but there was still more to learn. There's still, like, looking at this book, everybody learned something, right? Things to do or different ways to understand it from looking at that book. So you don't have to, you need to pick out a particular example, but the discussion posts in that were very good. So it should be just a matter of you taking them, cleaning them up, maybe reordering them, but your discussion post is the basis of section 2. Then section 3 in this is a similar sort of 1 to 2 page section, where what you're going to do is recap the changing, the revising of your paper in the 2 websites that we've created. One, the single structured HTML document, and then the experimental 4-page website, and looking at the ways that you changed those things and what you did to sort of chunk it down, and then thinking about how does that work? So the prompt here points out there's a lot of different ways in Reddish's book where she talks about using short sentences, write in your audience's words, no dialect, no register, right? So there's a call to simplify. She talks about headlines for the strongest headings, which are H1s, and then also talks about meaningful headings for H2 and H3 level headings in chapter 9. And she talks about shortening up and tightening the sentences. I mean, short paragraphs, like 1, 2, 3 sentence paragraphs tops. And then if you look at her book, I mean, her whole book is just, it's a ton of spacing, bullets, and images. So her book is an example of what she's obviously talking about doing. Now, it's very, very different when you look at that from what you look at in your academic writing, and converting it to be like that is a considerable shift. And it's worth us saying, wow, how does this work differently? How does it work for a reader versus how the academic paper worked? So the two main data sections, right, are recapping the they say, I say, and then recapping the changes that you made in revising your paper into a website, and chunking in different ways, chunking into smaller paragraphs, adding headings, tightening down text, using bullet lists, right? So those are the two things. And then you write the sort of reflection. Discuss and compare methods of demonstrating context and connection. And so after this is where I offer some things for you to consider in thinking about how, what is this writing trying to do? And there's a lot of different ways to go at this. I've tried to give you multiple options. You don't have to cover all of these. You want to think about what seemed to you to be the most interesting differences or comparisons across these. But I've offered this where, so chunking, for example, in our academic writing, we're very much working in the linear pattern, and that the text that you write is supposed to supply all of the negotiations, which is what they say, I say is teaching us how to do, is to make these sort of maneuvers inside linear text. But when you write the web page, even though you're chunking and adding bullets, those bullets and the headings are the things which supply the connective tissue of the writing. And so it works out very differently, and this is what I just want to hear you discuss and talk about for a page or so. It can go far longer if you want to talk about more topics, but this is the gist of the paper. And then as you sort of go through and write a 1 to 2 page discussion here at the end, reflecting on these two comparisons, then if you want to, you don't have to, but if you want to, you can go back and add a couple more sentences underneath the opening prompt for the essay. And that, in a nutshell, is finishing up, right, the conversions into a broken up web page, and then the reflection that you need to write and turn in that is about your revision of the website and the comparison across they say, I say. And of course, the reason that we're doing this and the reason we use they say, I say is that it struck me so much with the idea of conversation as the model for both of these, and the ways that those conversations happen is very different. And so understanding the ways that we carry out the conversation, which is connecting with people, and connecting with people that aren't necessarily present. The papers that you've learned to write are learning to engage with the conversation of the experts in your particular fields and your particular topics. So the academic pieces are jumping into a conversation that's ongoing. The negotiations, when it gets to a website, it still there's a bit more that you're talking directly to a reader, user, who wants to navigate the page less than read it. But if you've got to navigate the page, the person still needs to understand that writers are not just collectors of the data nodes. Writers are people who weave the webs of connection which give those nodes meaning. And that's the best way of sort of explaining how these patterns, the headings, the short sentences, the structure becomes all the more important when you have to write in this particular mode. And so navigation and this is a tricky way of thinking about it, actually becomes semantic. It carries out a lot of the rhetorical work. All right, so I've yacked on enough, but this should give you a good idea what to do to write the reflection, and basically you're copying the template and swapping in chunks of your paper, and then in what ways can you chunk it down further, add in some headings, and where possible incorporate some bullets and make your this experimental website much more chunked and much more like web writing. And there she goes.